So I'm pleased today to have with us two esteemed individuals. Derek Zimmerman, who is the head of the aftermarket strategy as well as division of Gulfstream. And we've also got Josh Krotec, who's from a company a lot of you think you've heard of, which is First Aviation Services, and you think it's that company in Teterboro that actually has an FBO, but it's a totally different company. And in order to, rather than me sort of screw up what they do, I'm going to ask Josh to explain what First Aviation Services is and how it's not that company in Teterboro.
Yeah, that's right. We're not the Teterboro FBO. We predate them and can't wait for the new name to take over. But really, First Aviation, our First Aviation at least, is a small private holding company. So the real companies that hopefully you get to know are various subsidiaries like Aerospace, Turbine Rotables, it's sponsoring here, and several others. They're mostly in the component repair and overhaul space. We do have a PMA parts company as well under First Aviation. We basically touch, the subsidiaries that is, basically touch almost every system in an aircraft other than engines and avionics, but everything landing gear, propellers, rotor blades, electronics, flight controls, all sorts of repair and overhaul capabilities. And then separately, we own Dart Aerospace as well, which is in the rotary wing market. That we actually hold that outside of First Aviation, but they have about 1,300 STCs for rotary wing aircraft.
Great. Well, Derek, I probably explained your role at Gulfstream incorrectly, so I invite you to correct my inaccuracies.
No, I think you had it right. So my responsibilities are for the aftermarket, which includes maintenance, but also all the support activities, entry into service, and whatever care and feeding airplane may need over its entire life cycle. So maintenance is definitely a significant component of that, and we'll talk about it today. But it's really what happens after that delivery experience and over the remaining life of the airplane.
Great. Well, thank you. I noticed that every time I seem to open up AIN or other aviation press, it seems that Gulfstream is opening yet another service facility or converting yet another jet aviation location into a service facility. Can you give everybody a little bit of background on Gulfstream's strategy and why you're doing this and you know, what's the end goal here? And how much more do you think you're going to be doing of that?
Sure. So supporting aircraft has been part of the Gulfstream DNA since we started. You know, going back to the Gulfstream 1 and Gulfstream 2, you can go back to the operators conference from '69 and you can see us talking about many of the same themes that we talk about today. But that investment in service has really matched that investment in designing and building airplanes. So we've been investing significantly, as you mentioned recently, with major new facility openings, and it really reflects, you know, the basics of our market. The fleet continues to get larger, more and more airplanes, and also more and more larger airplanes, and so we need to make sure that we have facilities that are ready to support that. There's both an opportunity and an obligation there. The obligation is our customers count on us to provide support, so we need to be ready to serve when they need that. And the opportunity is there's also a business aspect to that it's a meaningful contribution back to Gulfstream and our parent company, General Dynamics, and it lets us invest in major new facilities. We're in the process of opening 5 new 100,000 to 200,000 square foot facilities in the U.S. and internationally, and that's to be ready to serve that installed base when they need us to.
Were there any issues with the service prior to you guys expanding your own service network? You had third-party independent shops doing a lot of that work. Were there any quality problems or any issues of available slots for service that prompted you guys to do it? It was just more of an overall strategy about customer experience?
So I really do think it has a lot to do with to understand how the fleet is and being, you've got to be part of that experience. And so being close to the customer and being able to listen to the airplane as it goes through its life cycle so that you are responsive and ready to serve. So I really think it had a lot to do with, hey, this is really just our strategic directive, and our strategic vision is there shouldn't be anybody that knows the airplane better than we do. There shouldn't be anybody that's better positioned to take care of the airplane than we do. So what investment do we need to make sure that we can deliver on that promise to our operators? And that's really where the investment in tech ops and field reps and fast technicians and everything that we've done over the ensuing years, it's really where all that's come from. Be close to the customer, listen to them, understand what the airplane's doing, and be able to react and respond when they need it.
And you guys have obviously done a great job, as evidenced by the standing in some of the pro pilot polls on the service and aftermarket support. Josh, we're talking now to an OEM here, but do you compete with the OEMs? And if so, how do you compete with them? And is it a problem or is it a good thing?
Well, ultimately, yes, we do compete with the OEMs. We always say aviation or aerospace is a small industry, or sort of customers, competitors, all at the same time. But yes, in many product markets, we absolutely do compete. And at the end of the day, I think the reason why independence exists in the aftermarket is for competition. The owners and the operators really demand choice and competition for purposes of supporting their aircraft, and that ultimately requires independence to be involved. Obviously, the OEMs I'm definitely not anti-OEM in any way, shape, or form. Gulfstream, Textron, Embraer, Dassault, they're all fantastic companies, and the competition among them to sell new airplanes, new products, really drives innovation, drives the great future for our industry, like the presentation Michael had yesterday with their Pulse program, the things that Gulfstream's doing. The competition between the OEMs drives that innovation. In the aftermarket, while certainly there's an aspect of the OEMs competing against each other to have that reputation for good product support, like the ProPilot and AIN polls you mentioned. When it comes to specifically supporting existing customers, existing fleets, particularly as the fleets age, there really isn't that competition between OEMs to support those planes. So the owners and operators really demand that independents step in, offer solutions to really drive the competition with the OEM, and really force both of us, independents and the OEM, to provide better value, provide better products, provide better service.
Derek, one of the things when I speak to our clients, when they talk about servicing their aircraft, they make two comments. Number one, if we take it to the OEM service center, it's more expensive. So then, of course, the next question is it worth it to take it to pay more money? So why should a client of ours who's got a 5-year-old, say 550, send it to Gulfstream aftermarket as opposed to sending it to an independent shop? What are your competitive advantages with respect to the end customer?
Yeah, so there can definitely be some difference in cost structure. I would say, the single biggest driver behind that is, from an aftermarket perspective, if you're solely in the aftermarket, and there are a lot of different entities that do this, you're typically in pursuing the revenue opportunities associated with that. As an OEM, no matter who we are, we all have a significant obligation to go out and be able to support the unfunded items, so warranty support, the other types of tech support, manual publication development, systems development, all those things that happen in the aftermarket. We're bearing some of that cost as an OEM, so certainly that's reflected in the cost structure. But there are certainly also some offsetting advantages to being at the OEM level. One of them is certainly we've got direct access to the intellectual property associated with the design itself. So we know how the airplane went together, we know how it was tested. Oftentimes there's an opportunity for us to go back and reuse a lot of that data as we're developing a repair or a modification scheme. So it's an easier access to that. We typically maintain that direct relationship with the supply chain, oftentimes at a different level, different volume of work. So there's some economies of scale and some financial economies associated with that, where we can exert some leverage that are sometimes harder, depending on kind of how much a relationship exists between a third-party provider and that same equipment or component OEM. And so those are a couple of the main things. And then for us, it's really, we get an opportunity around specialization. So I think, as was mentioned from the engine manufacturers this morning, as OEMs, and Josh mentioned it, we're really not competing with each other in the service world. We're really working to support our own aircraft the best that we can. And as a result of that, we're doing, I know speaking for Gulfstream, we're doing just Gulfstream aircraft, and we're doing, probably 800 aircraft a month come into a Gulfstream center for maintenance. And we're doing 500,000 hours worth of maintenance a month. So we're building up repetition and speciality, and we're investing in tooling and training and technology that are unique to our particular aircraft. That makes sense for us. We have to do that. And as a result, there's also some first mover advantage to us. Once you move beyond that and you move into third parties, now you've got to make some smart decisions about where do you invest your money and how much of that is an opportunity market for you and where can you get the maximum bang for your buck. We have to do it. So that calculus behind our decision making is a little bit different than it would be in for a third party. But again, I go back to the investments that we've made, and I'm probably speaking for the other OEMs. We believe that we're in a position to do, as long as we invest wisely and make sure that we've got all the capability and capacity there, there shouldn't be anybody that can outsmart us or outwork us when it comes to our ability to take care of Gulfstream aircraft specifically, because that's all that we do.
So you've given a lot of great reasons why somebody ought to go with a Gulfstream aftermarket solution. Josh, if I'm in your shoes, are you worried about the OEM quashing you, deciding, hey, well, these independents, we got to put them out of their misery once and for all? I'm sorry to use that phrase, but...
Yeah, well, I would certainly say that, sure. I think most businesses in here stay up at night at least once in a while to, thinking about what is the competition doing, how do I need to stay ahead of my competition, and certainly, if we're competing with the OEMs, we have some incredibly formidable competitors in the markets we serve, and as Derek's saying, competitors that know those aircraft very well. So we are constantly thinking, a lot of our energy is focused on how do we stay ahead of our competition, whether it's other independents or the OEMs. What can we do to make sure we're successful in the market? And when you think of independence and the variety, whether it's an independent service center or a PMA parts manufacturer or someone making STCs or some point, there's always sort of the first thought of, well, the independent provider is lower priced, but at the end of the day, I don't think that's an effective way for us to compete. Really, business jet owners aren't dumb. They don't want cheap. They want better value in some sense. It's got to be a better service or a better product that we're providing. Otherwise, we will be squashed. We will be out of business. So when we enter a product market, a lot of times we have the benefit of hindsight being a third-party service provider. Maybe the owner-operators have approached us saying, hey, there's this problem with a certain system on this fleet type. Can you solve it? So we unlike the OEM, we don't have the original design data. We're not trying to predict the future of what's going to happen in that product 10, 20 years from now. We have the benefit of understanding what issues the operators are seeing, and typically when the operators come to us, they're coming to us because of something we've specialized in, like propellers in the airline market or landing gear in the corporate market, and saying, hey, we see this problem. What do you recommend? And we'll come up with, or if we can come up with a solution that we think is a better service or better product, better value, then we will go ahead and make the investments in engineering, R&D, enter that market, and offer that service.
So, Derek, we've talked a lot here about delivering quality service. One of the main components of that, of course, is the labor force. We talk a lot about the pilot shortage, but there's less paper and airtime given to the mechanic shortage and the engineering shortage. Are you experiencing a shortage? If so, what is Gulfstream doing to sort of fill the pipeline so that you guys can actually open more service centers and deliver the product that you're promising to deliver? To me, if I look at the math, it looks awfully difficult to do that.
So I would say maybe two things on that. One is we're definitely in a different labor market than we've been, even if you think maybe 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago. At Gulfstream, I wouldn't say we're experiencing any shortage. We're able to and have continued to grow over the years. We probably add somewhere between 100 and 200 technicians a year in support of the new facilities and just the expansion of the fleet. And based on retirements and people moving around the organization, we probably have to hire about as many, if not more, just to keep up with the replacement rate. So that puts us somewhere around 300 plus to 400 gross hires a year. And we're able to do that. Now, we've got some different advantages given our size and the number of markets that we operate, parent company. All of those things it's unique for us. Everybody else has your unique circumstance. But I would say what's different is we certainly don't find in the marketplace a significant number of already experienced technicians waiting to or looking to move from one job to another. And again, maybe there's some uniqueness in the Gulfstream industry because we do a lot of our own maintenance, either in our bases or our customers do that. What we really find is you've got to have a mechanism to take the ab initio person that has some technical aptitude, and you've got to be able to train them effectively and rapidly and bring them into the industry, maybe from a different background, automotive, electronics, somewhere else. Because you just can't go out and find a large number of already experienced technicians to add to your labor pool. So there's a couple different things for us. One is just awareness. You know, as an industry, we continue to fight issues of public perception, both in this country and others. It tends to be an industry where not a lot of people have natural exposure to it. So one of the things that we work is just outreach to make sure that as kids are growing up and as young adults are thinking about careers, that they think about business aviation and they think about our industry. So we reach out to, you know, in the communities we serve, we're in the middle schools, we're in the high schools, we've got programs that expose people to what we do to try and create some excitement and nothing else, awareness. We recognize few, if any, of those students or young people may end up being at Gulfstream, but hopefully they'll go someplace across our industry. So some of it is just community outreach and raising the visibility and profile in a positive way for what we're doing. The other piece is we've got to go beyond the traditional approach to creating new technicians. So, you know, traditionally, somebody goes to an A&P school, they come out of that, they go to work maybe in a service center. A&P school graduation is extremely competitive for those of you that are in this space. You know that it's not unusual for a major airline to show up at an A&P school and take the entirety of a graduating class. And so you've got to be able to build some relationships because they've got a tremendous appetite for replacement. We share the state of Georgia with another major airline that has a maintenance depot, and if I remember the math correctly, for expansion and attrition, they need about 5,000 technicians a year. So what we need is a couple hundred is really just a drop in the bucket for that. So we've got to create, we know we can't rely solely on A&P schools. We know we can't rely solely on partner service providers, flight safety, C&E, and others that do a lot of classroom and theory training. That's a great start, but it's not enough. And given the demand for those technicians, putting an inexperienced person out on the floor with an experienced person is just really an effective way to bring that experienced person's productivity down and put that inexperienced person in a place where they're not as confident and competent as we would like them to be, and therefore there's risk that shouldn't and doesn't have to be there for them and for customer property. So what we've done to move beyond that is we've invested in an on-the-job training center where we've got additional classrooms. We've got labs where students can come in and practice what they've heard, and then we have a simulated service center essentially where they can go out, where we can control and create a safe space where they can work on our assets and they can repeat things over and over again, and there's no pressure for delivery or a customer that wants their airplane back or worried about the quality of work they're doing. They can build up that level of competence and then they go out into the service center. So I think, and I'm sure we're not alone in this, but finding and creating new ways to help bridge that gap, create people that want careers and then give them an opportunity to enter this space and lower those barriers of entry and not have to compete head to head with some of those really big players that have just a tremendous appetite for technician and technician turnover.
It sounds like you've built a playroom for mechanics.
That's really what it is. Yep. Okay,
great. Well, so Josh, I find your situation sort of fascinating because of all the companies, sort of private companies in the space, you guys are also pilot owners. Mm-hmm. You've owned 2 business aviation aircraft. So, and I have to ask this question, how do you maintain them? Do you use OEMs or do you use aftermarket?
Well, that's a great question. So we do currently own 2 light jets. I flew in on our Mustang, and then my boss is in Texas with the Phenom. And I won't say which one, but one of those airplanes is entirely on the OEM program.
And why is that?
We just think it's a great value. I don't think it can be beat in terms of, well, I should say they're both on the engine programs.
Everybody here, listen to that. This is an aftermarket expert saying the OEM program is a great value, okay? Just want you to realize that.
That one in particular. So then we have the other airplane, and for that one, we didn't think that the OEM programs were as good a value. We do use independent service providers for those. We do some of the maintenance ourselves and some of the components like the landing gear and a handful of the other components.
Oh, I'd certainly hope so, since you're a landing gear overhaul shop.
Well, exactly. But at the end of the day, if you know, we for one of our airplanes, if we think there's a better product or better value out there, you know, we won't waste our time doing the work ourselves. We'll send it somewhere else to be done. I mean, I'd like to think that we're kind of reasonable human beings when it comes to how we make decisions like that. So, yeah, I mean, to me, that's an example of the competition between OEMs and independents in those markets is, you know, at least one of the markets has driven a great OEM package that we use, and the other, I'd say, I guess, wasn't enough competition yet to drive the OEM programs to be, you know, be where the owners or operators want them to be.
Great. Derek, one last question because we're running out of time, but fundamentally, are there any sort of industry changes or regulatory changes coming down the road that are going to have a big impact on the way that Gulfstream goes about servicing the aftermarket?
So I think there are probably three things that are probably not Gulfstream unique, but one of them is, you know, you've got new product and just kind of the size and shape of airplanes is changing. Obviously with, you know, our fleet has continued to get bigger, and the practical implication of that is airplanes take up a lot more space in service centers now. And for those of you that have airplanes, they take up much more space in hangars than they ever did before. 650 is about 10,000 square feet on the square. Versus a G4 was about 7,000 square feet. So you can blot out a lot of real estate, which is one of the reasons we're building new facilities and making sure that we've got enough space to do that. So I just think that the changing kind of demographics of the business aviation fleet is one of the factors. Certainly shifts in technology, I think, are another big change. As we have introduced new product, that product, like every other product that we use in our day-to-day lives, has become more integrated. It's a lot more software-driven product than it used to be in terms of, you know, a lot of mechanically driven product. I think a couple of recent studies, aviation space, you know, we're now creating products that have tens of thousands of lines of individual code, where old systems used to be primarily analog and mechanical. And so that creates a completely different demand for the type of technician that you need and the investment that you need to make in training and development, because you really need people that are system architects and software engineers. You need to have that type of mindset and skill set.
So you're saying we need motorheads and geeks combined?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a big change. If you look at what are the comparables, we talk about the availability of technicians. What else would somebody go out and do with a technical aptitude? And it's easy to say, hey, there's a couple of comps. Historically, we'd have thought probably like, you know, electrician, commercial electricians, master plumber, tradespeople that have a high level of skill. It's not unusual to see those pay rates somewhere between $100 and $200 an hour, charging out comparable to what we would see across most of aviation. And it's the same thing if you think about IT techs and professionals. They're in that same marketplace, and so you've got to be able to compete with that. We're in a highly regulated market. There's some pros and cons to that, but you've got to understand what are you competing with, and can you provide a meaningful value prop to the employee? And then, as an industry, can we wrap our heads around, hey, we are in a very competitive space for labor, and when you're in a space like that, it changes the supply-demand economics, and as a result, it can change the rates and the costs of ownership and operation.
Now my head is spinning. In one sort of several phrases there, we've got motorheads, geeks, and value proposition all together. That shows you dramatically how servicing an aircraft has changed over the past 20 years. You almost have to have a degree in computer code and be able to rebuild your mother's car.
Yeah, I think that car analogy is a great one, right? So if you used to have a mechanical aptitude, it wasn't a big deal to take your car engine apart and work on it and put everything back together. But probably very few of us do that today because of integrated electronic engine control. There's a lot of black boxes. There's a lot of software talking. It's harder to know by looking at it what that's doing. You need to go to people that specialize in that body of knowledge. It's hard, you know, with a touchscreen cockpit, it's hard to drill a hole through a panel and put a circuit breaker in there. That doesn't really work. You've got to understand how the code works, and you've got to be able to write code.
Now, of course, there's the conspiracy theory out there that the OEMs are doing this as a way to promote their aftermarket sales. I didn't say that, did I? Okay.
That's crazy
guys,
talk.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Sorry, Derek, I had to do that. But we've got about 3 or 4 minutes for questions. And do we have any questions in the audience? We've got Slido. We've got a few good questions here. Do our military veterans a great source? Derek, quickly.
They certainly are for us. I'd say somewhere between 25 and 35% of our workforce are former active military, and that's been a great recruiting pool for us.
And it's a great question, by the way, whoever asked it, given the fact that we had Veterans Day on Monday. It was also a Remembrance Day in the UK, 2 important holidays, and showcasing. At least we did at Citi. We had a whole day of veterans presenting how they go about their work within the bank, so it was really neat. Yeah. Josh, any issues for you there on that question?
Yeah, and I just want to touch base. Absolutely, military veterans are a great source, but I think you sort of mentioned earlier, ultimately pulling technicians or other employees from elsewhere in the industry ultimately isn't sustainable for all of us. And I think we all, whether we're talking about pilots, technicians, engineers, really need to think about how we market our industry to younger generations. I mean, we look at, there's a whole lot of baby boomers retiring from our companies, and not as many Gen Xers ready to fill those positions, and even fewer millennials. So that, I don't like that aerospace-specific trend we have, and I think all of us doing whatever we can from, I know like we work at the local schools too, trying to get, communicate to the younger generations what it is we do in our industry, what are the career paths, and what's the future look like. We'll hopefully help build that pipeline up again.
So Josh, I was working with a client that owns a very large aircraft actually in VVIP configuration, and he told me how much they had to pay to Boeing to get data every year to actually be able to support the aircraft. It was an astonishingly high number. So the question that pops up right now, how are some OEMs not making component repair data available to MROs affecting your business and industry? Does that affect you?
It absolutely affects, I think, all independent providers in the aftermarket. And I'd just sort of flip it around as, I guess, a tip to the owners and operators out there that, at the end of the day, the power rests with you, the owner and operator. You're responsible for the airworthiness of your airplane. You need the data to keep your airplane airworthy. You need parts. You need something from the OEM. Ask for it. It's your airplane, and that will help foster the competition that we currently have, and hopefully make us all provide you better products and service in the future.
Derek, any thoughts on that comment?
I think that it really varies by market segment and OEM to OEM. I think at the bottom line, we all have an obligation to make sure these aircraft have long, useful life cycles. On the other hand, I know that we're in the business of creating a lot of data, and we spend billions of dollars on new aircraft programs. I had this conversation with a customer recently that wanted to get into a lot of component repair until they recognized and realized how expensive it was to get the specific training, tooling, and everything else that they needed to do that. So that's why, again, we look at it as an obligation. Yes, that aircraft needs to be supported, and we need to be there to be able to fill any gaps. And certainly, we look to partners also in the third party to fill any gaps that we may not be able to cover naturally ourselves.
Well, great. We've just run out of time. Perfect. We're over by about 3 or 4 seconds. Josh, is there any one, I know that Derek's had a lot of time to chat here. Is there anything you want to add before we sign off?
Well, no, I appreciate you having me here today. And like I said, please do visit my colleagues in the back at Aerospace Turbine Rotables. I hope David will sell you a few landing gear overhauls, make it all worthwhile for us.
And thank you both for coming. And I would say that just keep in mind that this is first aviation that is not in Teterboro. So with that, Alistair, we're all set then, I assume? Move on? Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.